Time again for Doc Jacques, your Addiction Lifeguard podcast. I am Dr. Jacques de Bruckert, a psychologist, licensed professional counselor, and addiction specialist. If you are suffering from addiction, misery, trauma, whatever it is, I'm here to help. If you're in search of help to try to get your life back together, join me here at Doc Jacques, your Addiction Lifeguard, the Addiction Recovery Podcast. I wanted to be real clear about what this podcast is intended for. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes, but not considered help. If you actually need real help and you're in need of help, please seek that out. If you're in dire need of help, you can go to your nearest emergency room, or you can check into a rehab center or call a counselor like me and talk about your problems and work through them. But don't rely on a podcast to be that form of help. It's not. It's just a podcast. It's for entertainment and information only. So let's keep it in that light, all right? Have a good time, learn something, and then get the real help that you need from a professional. When I tell addicts that trauma is the driving force in their addiction, most of them say, that's not me. Interesting. So let's talk about why. Why is that? So what trauma really means in our lives, not just with addiction, not with just addicts, but what it really means is that it's not just war, it's not just abuse, it's tragedy. It's also neglect, shame, rejection, chronic stress. See, there's big T trauma and things like war, abuse, heavy abuse, tragedy, death, things like that. Those are big T traumas. The little T traumas, neglect, shame, rejection, chronic stress, that kind of abuse. That's one that it's death by 1,000 cuts. The big T trauma is just one big event, and it can be just that, just one event. Trauma is a survival response. It's not a weakness. And, when people experience trauma, they flip into that survival response in their lives. Sometimes people see trauma as being something that's making you weaker. But your body and your brain, they adapt around that trauma. And oftentimes in ways that hurt long term. So when you have those long-term hurts, it plays out in different ways. So I've had combat vets in my office. I've had people that work for 3-letter agencies that get exposed to all kinds of different kinds of experiences of trauma over, a long period of time. The big T trauma is over a long period of time. And that hurt is kind of easy to see. Those people tend to be, it's easier to see the damage. Combat vets will come in and they get triggered easily into PTSD responses, and you can see them. I can see them doing it right in front of me. They start to get that 1,000-mile stare. They start to become disoriented, even though they're sitting in a room and it's peaceful and quiet in my office. But I can see them shift into that PTSD response, and that's when I have to be careful about how I'm navigating through this with them, because I want to be able to help them heal through this. But the small T traumas, I can also see people who suffered from a tremendous amount of parental abuse, let's say. Let's go with that. The parental abuse. And so as a small child, they experience this over a long period of time. And it's just as evidence, but it's a little bit harder to recognize. You don't get the 1,000-mile stare. You don't get the dissociation that goes on. They don't decompensate in my office. And it takes quite a while for them to be in that responsive mode. And that's simply because it's a smaller trauma spread out over many, many times of exposure. So it looks very different. But it doesn't matter. Either way, they are experiencing something, and you can see it happening in the long term. And that's why they end up becoming dysfunctional in some way. They maladapt around the trauma, the coping. So Why do addicts push back against that trauma language? Well, they have had to bury a lot of what they experience. So there's a lot of denial, or they'll minimize. They don't feel like they're the victim. They don't want to see themselves as a victim because they've had to keep moving forward, especially if it is something like childhood trauma. That's one that gets really buried. And so the denial and the minimizing it is one way of doing it. Like the statement, "I'm not a victim." That's what they have in their head. I'm not a victim. Another way that people respond to that and push back against the language of trauma that I use is shame. And it's interesting. The response of shame comes from the shutdown, and that's one technique. Another one is that they minimize. So, the shame, they'll minimize the shame. They'll deflect, and they'll say, well, other people had it worse. Or one of my favorites is the abuser. If it's a parent, for example, the abuser, the label that the victim has is that, well, that's the best they could do, or that's the best they could do at the time. And I always scratch my head and I think, so locking you in a closet for 5 hours, that's the best they could do? Wow, that's interesting. And using plain language like that helps them in the coping, because they get to see that what they're doing is minimizing, but what the truth is, right? The enemy wants you to believe the lie, not the truth. The truth enlightens and it helps. So that's part of it, is shame. They feel embarrassed. And if you were sexually assaulted, especially for men who were sexually assaulted, that's a strong shame component. Men being sexually abused, either as adults when they're raped or as children. A lot of shame attached to that. For women too. I'm not minimizing that one. Some of it's numbness. They honestly don't feel the pain anymore. It's something they've lived with for so long that they don't even connect mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. They don't connect to the abuse. They become so numb to it that they honestly don't feel the pain anymore. They've dissociated from it. And so it just kind of gets ignored. It doesn't get brought up. Fear is one. If I open the door, then I'm going to lose it. I'm going to fall apart. I'm going to lose whatever control or stability I seem to have been able to create in my life. So they're fearful of ever going back there. Which is interesting because they're fearing the thing that they're going to run into if they think about it. But every time they think about it, if you're an addict, you end up using, which gives you this weird illusion of control. And so I'm fearful that if I go there, I'm going to lose control. I'm going to, it's going to destroy me. So then the fear, the counter for that is the control of illusion. Drugs and alcohol make you feel like you're doing something about it. It's a weird feeling. I remember distinctly as I was, the worst of my drinking, I couldn't do anything about what was in my head. So I felt like if I drank, it would make it better. I didn't think it would go away. I knew it wouldn't go away. And everybody I talk to who's an addict, they know it's not going to go away. That's not the point. You're not drinking it to make it go away. But what you are doing is you're asserting a false sense of power over the thing that you experienced. And you go into your head and you start responding with this power struggle. And so I'm doing something about it. I feel like I'm empowering myself. So the more I drink, the more I'm controlling it, the more I'm beating this, which, it doesn't last, unfortunately. So the reason that addicts push back against the trauma language is they think they've got it all figured out and they're already coping with it well. And they're not, which is why they're in my office, or, why I am dealing with them in that moment, because they're not. It's destroying their lives. The thing that they're using to cope is actually destroying them. So the use of substances, and I'm just going to stick with substances. Of course, I know food is it a substance? Gambling, shopping, pornography, getting stuck on the internet, surfing your phone constantly. Those are coping mechanisms too. But just for our conversation today, let's just say it's substances as a coping mechanism. So, drugs, alcohol, they can make you forget, but it's interesting because they really don't make you forget. Even when you're using, you perhaps go into this room where you're actually engaging in that experience again, but you're now somehow making sense of it or controlling it, or, you're beating on the abuser or something is going on in your head, but it's a temporary escape. It's temporary. As long as you're using, you can sort of create this illusion of control and I'm doing something about it. But when you're not using, you're not doing it anymore, right? So it's a temporary escape. And it's not a fix, it's an escape. Stimulants give you energy, right? It energizes you. I used to, when I was in college in my younger years, in my 20s, in my bachelor's degree, I did some of my best writing when I was really drunk. It wasn't because it was like freeing me up to free thought. It was just very energizing. So I would listen to like crazy heavy metal music as loud as I could in my headphones, and I'd be typing away. And it was my way of distracting myself from my depression. And so I was fighting the depression by use of some kind of a stimulant, whether it was an upper or downer. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. Sometimes people get energized by doing sedative type drugs, which that was my case. Stimulants, however, and the use of that word stimulant is an upper, right? So stimulants give you energy, and that fights your depression, you think. So if I'm taking speed, and several of my friends were speed freaks, and they would be doing a lot of speed. Alcohol calms you down. It eases anxiety. Hypervigilance can go away temporarily, yes, but the detrimental effects of that use for that purpose is very problematic. And alcohol for me was very problematic. Addiction becomes the shield against the trauma pain. And that's what you think you're doing, is your addiction is between you and your pain, but the shield ends up, cutting them. It ends up destroying you and destroying your life, causing you all kinds of harm. So the common pushbacks that I hear is, when I ask them, so what was your childhood like? They'll say, it was fine. I had a normal childhood. And then they tell me the horror stories for the next, 4, 5, 6 sessions, in the therapy process. Sometimes they'll just say it was just like, if it was in college or high school, I just like to party. I just like to have a good time. Yeah, but you're drinking 10 times more than everybody around you, or you're smoking a lot of weed, or you're shooting up. What are you talking about? Pushback about, stuff I hear, that's in the past. Why do I need to talk about that? Why? It's not really relevant anymore. It's not important. So those are defenses to avoid facing the pain. And again, they came into my office because things are not going well. They didn't come into my office because things are going very well. They're not going well. They're going horribly. They'll sometimes deflect and they'll say the usage is the problem. So I'm like, okay, well, stop using and then let's see what happens. And they can't because the pain keeps coming back. So they're just trying to avoid dealing with the thing that has been slowly destroying them from inside. So how does that change? Where's the turning point? So the turning point, it often stalls until the trauma is identified. The way I put it is, trauma experiences, if there's lots of them, are kind of like cockroaches or rats or mice in your house. You turn the lights off, they all come out. They're running all over the place. You turn the lights on, what do? The mice, the cockroaches, everything runs away, right? Because it now can be identified. So what I try to think of it as is I'm trying to help shed light to something that wants to live in the darkness. It wants to live in the darker recesses of your mind where it can start chipping away at you from the dark. So it's in the unconscious or subconscious, and it just lives there. And it's just waiting. It's waiting for you to be triggered by some experience, some thought, some words. Maybe you bump into somebody that you haven't seen for 15 years. Something, a picture, a photograph, a movie, a song, anything that can trigger an old thought. When it's in your unconscious mind and you haven't really dealt with it, it's going to pop out. And that's when there's a problem. So that's the darkness that it's in, and it will spread out and start, chewing away at you. So what we're doing in therapy and the process that you need to go through to recover from this is turn the lights on, right? Don't let the trauma just exist in you, hidden. We have a phrase for that in recovery. We say, well, that experience is living rent-free in your head, or that person that you have this issue with is living rent-free in your head. Why would you do that? Why would you let them stay there? So it will get stalled out, that recovery. That turning point needs to happen when you can stop doing that. So the resilient client, the one that has the breakthrough trauma, is the trauma admission. That's the person who, they're sitting in front of me, and I can see them just start to lose it. I can see the emotions start coming out, and then they start crying. And it's because I've touched on the thing that is the thing they've been hiding the whole time. And sometimes it happens in the first or second session. Sometimes it takes me 6 months to get them there. Depends on how buried the trauma is and the level of trauma, frankly. The bigger the trauma, the longer they've been, coping with it by minimizing and dismissing, the longer it takes to come out. There's a trust issue between the client and the therapist many times that they engage in. It's like this level of trust. When they first come in and see me, they're not sure to trust. When that is built up over time, then I can see it. But I actually see, and they start to really get in that place. And I do not try to comfort them to minimize. I won't do that. I will be there fully present with them while they're experiencing that pain. And sometimes there's silence, and it can be long because they're now in that place. I know they're feeling it. I know they need to feel it. They're showing me that they're feeling it, which is a sharing of that. It's an offloading. And and when you feel connected to somebody, you feel like they get it. That's when you start to really open up. And so sitting in that thought, and it's, honestly, personally, it's very challenging for me to do that because, man, they're feeling it, and it's making me feel it. And that's the whole point of therapy, right? I say that to my clients. Your job is to make me feel what you're feeling. In other words, I need you to be fully in that so that I get a sense and an understanding of what you're really feeling. It's not going to harm me, it's not my pain, but I need you to feel it. So facing trauma is not, I don't want to use the word blame, but it's not like shame. Facing it is not shameful. It's you owning it and starting that healing process. So facing the trauma is that breakthrough. It's that transition, and it's the thing that will get you to the healing. And again, if your coping mechanism, chemicals, yes, but it's also, there's another one there, and it is minimizing and dismissing. And again, those words that I hear people say, like, well, that's, my dad was kind of problem, he would hit me every once in a while, but he did the best he could. You're taking the person who was the abuser and you're putting them in a place that they don't belong. They don't belong on some pedestal. Sorry. They don't belong on a pedestal. They don't belong in the category of didn't happen, didn't do that to me. They did do it. And when I see that breakthrough happen, that's a turning point for the client. That's when you're struggling with this, and you can, with another person, fully engage in that experience of the idea of the trauma and the emotion that it brings up in you. That is where the healing starts. So hopefully you can get to that turning point, that transition. So what do you need to do? You need to be in a place where you can offload and stop isolating. I've said this 1,000 times in these podcasts, and I tell my clients, I've said it 10,000 times in my office. Isolation is addiction's best friend. Isolation helps the addiction live in you. And the isolation is, I experienced a life of horror and problems. And if I share them with another person, it's not me just talking and the other person's going, oh, that must have been terrible. How does that feel when I repeat that back to you? That's not it. It's a connection with another human being that says, you know what you experienced was horrible. And you believe them. Like they're speaking truth about your situation because you've spoken the truth about your situation. That's wrong. That's horrible. They should not have done that to you. That is a terrible thing. You being angry about that, that's the right feeling. You need to hear these encouraging, nurturing kind of words. So healing is possible, but it takes many things, not just a single person. It's therapy, the truth, faith, community. All right. So let me break that down just a little bit. So therapy, individual therapy with a really good therapist, one that is not a person-centered Rogerian therapist necessarily, but somebody who actually understands trauma and addiction. They need to know both. And they need to understand there's a linkage. And if they don't understand that, and you're dealing with somebody who's like, we got to do harm reduction, or, it's a behavior, so let's extinguish the behavior. And they never, ever deal with the trauma. And I hear this from my clients who come in and they've been to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 therapists over their lifetime. And they come in and tell me something, and I kind of like, ooh, wait a minute, that was abuse. And then I start asking them and then find out that their mom or dad or somebody was abusing them in some way. And I say, did any of your other therapists ask you about that? No. Really? You've been to 5 therapists. Nobody ever asked you about your, did they ever use the word abuse? And, sometimes I'll hear, there was 1 or 2, but what'd they do with it? Well, we just kind of noted it. They said, oh, that must have been terrible. And then we just kind of moved back into today. And I'm like, oof. So therapy, good, competent therapist. Second thing, honesty. Now I'm going to change that. I'm going to add to that. I'm going to say honesty and openness, right? Honesty and openness, because honesty and openness are 2 different things. Openness differs from honesty is you just saying what happened. Okay. But then if you do that and then just immediately shut back down, you're not open. So honest and open, because we have to battle shame. So if you're battling shame, honesty and openness will get you to the place where you can stop being ashamed about your past. My father was extremely verbally abusive to me. And that I didn't know what to do with that as a kid. I just didn't know. So I just became violent and I shut down. And then I started drinking. And so that's a horrible combination. And that's a pretty common one. I have found with my clients, especially male clients, that's what they do. They don't know what to do with it. So they just kind of shut down. Sometimes they get violent. Sometimes they don't. And then they start using chemicals. Honesty and openness is when somebody says, that must have been really bad. That was really wrong. That's different than, oh, how does that make you feel when I repeat these words back to you that you just said to me? It's like, no, let's put a label on it. That's wrong. That's abuse. And that's what you got to do. So having a sense of community around you means that you have surrounded yourself with people in AA, NA, SA, OA, Al-Anon, where you have a group of people who have also gone through the same thing. So they get it, right? It's people that get it. That's the key. They get it because they've been through that. So you have to have community, and you got to have a list of numbers that you can call people when you're feeling really bad. They have to know your face. It's circling the wagons. You got to have somebody to be able to circle the wagons. You got to have a number of wagons to be able to circle. You can't have one wagon, one person. You got to have a number of people, but you also have to feel felt. And that's the key. That's the key with therapy. That's the key with the recovery community. You feeling felt. And that's the key. Like, I was this, and the person looking at you goes, yes, I was too. And that's wrong. That's terrible. Oh, you get it. Right. And then finally, faith, having faith. You can be healed because the enemy wants to destroy you. Okay. But if you're just doing nothing but constantly battling the enemy and you don't have any healing, the idea that there's a higher power that will guide me or protect me or make me whole again. And for Christians, that's Jesus, and that's God. And so having faith means that I actually can be changed. I can be healed. It's just a matter of, am I willing to? So God doesn't waste pain. He deems it when it is surrendered. It's laying it at his feet, laying it down. That doesn't mean laying it down and keep a hand on it and clutching it at his feet. It's like laying it down. So it's surrendered. I'm going to surrender my pain. And when you surrender the pain, that's when forgiveness starts moving in, right? So you can start to move forward. Forgiveness is not carrying the anger and resentment and contempt that you feel towards somebody else for what they did to you. It doesn't mean they got away with it. It doesn't mean that it wasn't recorded. They will have to answer for whatever they did, and it's not going to be you that they answer to. It's between them and God. And so finding ways to understand some concept of like forgiveness really requires you to have faith. The as a lifeguard, I would say you can't rescue someone who insists that they're fine while they're drowning. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? They are drowning and you can see it. You're looking right at them drowning and they're going, no, I'm fine. I don't need your help. And certainly as a lifeguard, I had that experience a few times where people would say that. I'd come out and I'd just wait. I'd just be in the water. I'd just be in the water with my rescue can and I'd just be waiting. And they're struggling more and more and more. And then finally I'm like, do you want help now? Because I'm not going to fight somebody that's still on top of the water and they're talking to me. It's like, do you need help now? Yeah. And then I'd go in and I'd do the rescue. You can't rescue someone who insists that they're fine while they're drowning. Now, if the person, because my job as a lifeguard was to go get them, if they went under, I'm going to go get them. And sometimes God does that for us too. But that's kind of where that happens. So addiction and chemicals or whatever addiction it is, that's your coping mechanism. And it doesn't work. So I want you to reflect about what I've been telling you and go get help. Don't carry this trauma around by yourself. You don't need to carry it at all, but just please remember that trauma is just that. It's trauma, and it's not yours to own, but it's the enemy's tool that's going to destroy you. Well, that's it for this edition of Doc Shock, your addiction lifeguard. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have, please like and subscribe. And if you want to reach out to me, you can through my website, wellspringmindbody.com. This is Doc Shock saying, hey man, it's not worth ending your life trying to save your addiction. That's crazy. Go get help. Go to therapy. Go to rehab. Go to detox. Go see somebody. Do something. Don't let the enemy win in this battle for your soul with addiction and chemicals and all the other nonsense. And if you need help directly, you can reach out to me. I'll give you some guidance. You can ask me questions. So, until next time, this is Doc Shock saying, see ya.